Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, and welcome to everyone watching online. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the Green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? Okay, I would advise that speakers using the microphones are picked up by the cameras recording the meeting. Members of the public in the public gallery behind the speakers may be picked up by those cameras and have their image captured. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to move or leave the meeting. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls or messages in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. That includes me, I have to do mine. I have the following members who wish to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. Items 4 and 5C, Councillor Banbridge, and item 5C, Councillor Smith. Would any other member... And 4 as well. That was the next bit. Would any other members who wish to speak under Council Procedure 20.1 please announce it now? We've just done that. The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Item 5A, 22 St Peters Park Road. Item 5C, land adjacent of 198 Monkton Street. And item 5G, Vattenfall land at Port of Ramsgate, Royal Harbour Approach, Ramsgate. I have 3 apologies from councillors, Councillor Bright, Councillor Rizeki and Councillor Moore. Are there any other apologies? No. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Alban.
Yes, Chair. I'm declaring an interest in item 5A, Jackie Baker's recreational ground, as because I'm the Cabinet member responsible and I've had quite an input into the in what's in front of you this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do members agree that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 15th of November 2023 be approved as a correct record? And do I have a proposer first, please, Councillor Alban?
I'll just try to move things on, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. I have a proposal of Councillor Bayford and a seconder, Councillor Rattigan. Okay, do members agree? Now you can agree. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to hand over to the Planning Applications Manager for a point of information, please.
Thank you, Chair. The point of information with regards to item 5B, Little Cliffstone Farm, Chalk Hill, Ramsgate, this item has been deferred to next week's Extraordinary Planning Committee meeting held on the 19th of December. This is due to a clerical error as the notification for public speaking was not sent to the correct address for Cliffstone Parish Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, speaking under Council Rule 21, I have 2 councillors, starting with Councillor Banbridge. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, it's item 4. Item 4 is Who Farm. Okay. As per your planning report, a retrospective planning consent is being sought for the footpath that has been created, my brackets, instead of the footpath that is supposed to be there. It is noted that this version of the footpath is not intended for adoption by KCC. It would be gated but unlocked with signage informing users that whilst the path is privately owned and maintained, it is available to all. Our arguments are that the original footpath is the same width, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. Those that went to the site visit would have seen how the new path is all over the place compared to the original proposed path. The original approved path was subject to safety conditions and was compliant with KCC standards. The new path does not meet these standards, and those that went to the site visit would have seen that the public with disabilities could have problems with that slope. The original approved path was intended for use by the public and therefore would be maintained by the council, whereas the new path is now private, so there is no one taking responsibility for its upkeep and safety standards. Hence the objection about who has public liability for this path, what happens if there's an accident. The original approved path for the public would be maintained. During the site visit, the path seemed to have been cleared, but it's been overgrown all summer, so not representative of what has been the case normally. The new private path, open to the public at their own risk, doesn't have anyone officially maintaining it, and we expect will end up overgrown again in no time, hence attracting enforcement issues against a long-departed developer. The original approved path was just that, an approved path, subject to standards suitable for the public. The new path has just been cobbled together to suit the convenience of the developer. My question is, what is the point of having a planning officer procedures if a developer can just override them and do what they want? I would ask that this retrospective application is rejected and that the original path is constructed as agreed and put back in the public domain for the use, safety and well-being of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And well, first of all, what Councillor Banbridge said. In addition, I'd like to emphasise the point that if this path is not adoptable and is not adopted, then it does not serve the interests of the community in Minster. It does not perform its purpose. It does not deliver what the people of Minster deserve. The people of Minster are inundated, I think, by new developments, by new build developments. They have accommodated, excuse the pun, but they have accommodated hundreds of new houses, and the least that this developer can offer is a footpath that enables the people of Minster to traverse the distance between Minster and Monkton. It's not safe to replace the planned and approved path with an unadoptable path. It doesn't serve the purpose. And I think that's all I need to say on this particular application, that I do move that this application be rejected because it does not serve the people, the existing residents, as well as the new residents. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now pass to the Planning Applications Manager to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this was an application that was debated at last month's Planning Committee that members have been to the site visit for. The application is part retrospective permission for the footpath that's been constructed in the location shown in red on the plan, with additional requirements for gates and signage to be installed. So previously it was a requirement of the application in 2019 for 23 houses. The permission required that a 1.2 metre footpath along Monkton Road was constructed between points X and Y on the plan in front of members. Now, subsequent to the permission being granted, the applicant states that from information from the Land Registry and also Kent Highway's own adoption records, that the highway verge, or assumed highway verge corridor connecting those 2 points, was actually unregistered. The applicant states that to be able to gain control of that land, they would have had to show 12 years evidence of maintenance of the corridor, which neither the landowner, which is the adjacent farmer, or indeed the developer was not able to show, and therefore the footpath was constructed not in the location shown on the plan in front of members along the highway, but it was constructed the other side of that unregistered land, running from the housing development to join into the footpath on to the east of the site. So members walked the footpath. We've got a few photos just showing the footpath as constructed. So this is a width of 1.2 metres as stated, and then this is where it runs down to join into the existing footpath which runs along the rest of the road joining Moncton and Minster. So as part of the application, KCC Highways have been consulted. They've stated that they would require, they've suggested the provision of gates and signage, which would include the owner's contact details, and also they're requiring a condition with regards to maintenance of the footpath and vegetation clearance. Now, there are two conditions that relate to both of those elements. So conditions proposed 2 and 3. 2 states that within 2 months of the date of the permission or any permission, full details of the proposed gates and signage, including wording as indicated on the drawing, which would identify the management company that is responsible for maintaining the spaces within the housing development, would be responsible for any issues with the footpath. So that also includes some of the points that have been raised, not just in terms of maintenance of the footpath and vegetation clearance, but also insurance. So that would be the responsibility of the dedicated management company for the roads within the housing development. Some of the other points that were raised on the site visit related to the sort of access over the footpath itself. That's part of condition 3, which requires that it should be kept available for public use, the footpath, as well as that footpath's been constructed on the farmer's freehold land, but the applicant has an easement in perpetuity for the whole footpath for it to be constructed, and then subsequent to that to be maintained. So the condition with regards to the gates allows for some judgment with regards to the actual details of the gates themselves that would be installed. Specifically, we would be looking for two-way opening easy latch gates, so they could be used for those potentially in mobility scooters with walking sticks, etc., which accords with normal accessibility standards when you're looking at gates within rural areas. So overall, in terms of the considerations for members, officers' view is that the impact on the character and appearance of the area from the footpath is not significantly harmful to actually install the footpath itself, which has occurred. The route itself is considered to be safe and acts to link the footpath that you can see at the end here in this photo to the housing development, and subject to the conditions, it would accord with the requirements of KCC Highways, and therefore it is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is approved. Can someone please second it? Councillor Matterface, thank you. And now I'm going to open up for debate. Can I take Councillor Garner first, and then I'll take Councillor Keane. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I went on the site visit. There was a member of the public on the site visit whose name I can't remember, but he asked an interesting question which I don't think we got to the bottom of. I mean, it does refer to the reason why the footpath wasn't built in the original place that it was meant to be built. And as I understand it, it wasn't built where it was meant to be built because ownership of that land precluded it being built there. But I didn't quite understand if ownership of that land precluded anything being built on it. The developer was able to cross the land with a driveway into the development site. So I was just wondering if the developer was able to get that permission, why wasn't he able to get permission to do the rest? I mean, maybe it was just that short stretch of land where the footpath was meant to be. The other question the other concern I have is relating to these gates, because the gates seem to be actually making what is at the moment a pretty unsatisfactory alternative to what would have been built, totally unsatisfactory. They're adding obstacles rather than making it safe. It's adding to danger, as far as I could see. I mean, it's all right for people who can walk up and down quite ably because they can just go round the gates. But people using sticks or in a mobility scooter are going to struggle to get through the gates. It would be a lot easier if the gates weren't there, as far as I'm concerned. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have, in terms of the photo that you can see, I don't have the information about where the unregistered land is, and obviously we are having to look at the merits of the proposal as it is. How we've got to where we've got to isn't part of the determination as such. In terms of the gates specifically, and your comment about that is something obviously that has been raised as a concern about you're creating more of an obstacle. The applicant has stated that they've proposed the gates because KCC asked for it, and obviously we've sort of followed through on what KCC have suggested. In terms of if members felt that actually that the footpath itself without the gates but with the signage would be acceptable, that is an option to basically remove the gates from the conditions, which would then mean that just the signage would be provided. The signage is the point that is raising the liability issue, and actually would obviously outline who to contact in the event of any problems with the footpath in terms of its maintenance or vegetation, or indeed if there was any incident at all. So the signage does that purpose on that side of things. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chair. I did go on the site visit, and I'm glad I did, because it made an awful lot of difference from just seeing the photos to how I saw it on the day, particularly as it was quite an icy day, so it was also a bit slippery out. The footpath, to me, seemed fine, and it seemed a very safe route, although it's not ideal in that it does undulate a little bit. Then just further up from that photo is a much steeper hill, so a bit of undulation on that footpath is not going to be a problem for people in mobility scooters or that, if they can manage the next hill as well. It was also very interesting that we've talked about vegetation overgrowth, but on the day we saw it, where the KCC path takes over, it was actually more overgrown, so the space you had to walk was very narrow. So, you know, so long as this path is maintained of vegetation, this may well do better than the next part. Also, the other side of this photo, there's no path at all on the road. So all in all, I see this as a valuable part of the development that actually makes the route safer. My concern is the gates, because they seem just really quite strange in that they're not at the bottom of the slope before the lamppost you can see there. They're up that bit of the slope, so someone has got to go up that bit of a slope and then manage to open the gate and close it behind them, go along the straight footpath, do the same the other end, and to me that made it more dangerous and certainly less accessible for people with buggies or in scooters or what have you. And therefore I'm very glad to hear what's been said tonight, that there is an option to consider whether we can do without the gates. My question about that would be, what are the implications for us as a planning committee if we did go against what's been recommended by KCC and say that, you know, we wanted to approve it as it was but without the gates? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. KCC Highways are a consultee. We have been in slightly rare circumstances sometimes where applications have been objected to by KCC, and we have brought them to committee and recommended approval of them because there's either a disagreement or indeed that there are merits that outweigh whatever it is that KCC have objected to. Obviously, members are aware of what KCC have said. It doesn't mean that members can't choose to change, to go against that recommendation. In this instance, I would always advise that if KCC are recommending approval of something, I wouldn't suggest it's refused, because obviously having the highway authority behind any refusal is really, really important as appeal. In this instance, obviously it's a partial change to what they've asked for. And I think that there is a justification in terms of what they're really trying to identify within their comment. It's to really make it clear that this is on private land. It's not on adopted KCC highway. So therefore they aren't liable, and the signs would do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If members don't mind, I would also like to comment on it, having seen it. The reality is where the green verge I think, is not going to be viable for a path, not least because of the land registry issue, but because there are 3 lampposts in the middle of it that would have to have KCC's agreement to move, which would be another issue to deal with. The gates really are at the top of little slopes, and it's not realistic to put them at the bottom. On the basis that we would be looking at, well, the developers be looking at 180-degree swings so that they could be pushed open, for example, by people with mobility issues. What I had the imagination of when we talked about electric wheelchairs last time was someone at the top of a little slope forcing open a gate with their electric wheelchair and then careening down the slope. And similarly, looking upwards, trying to get the gate open from a looking upwards perspective. I think that the gates are dangerous if they are installed, and if KCC are adamant that the gates have to be there, then I would be requesting a disability access assessment of some kind. I would suggest at the point of the crossing of the farm entrance, which is not the one that we have on the screen here, but the next entrance further down, that instead there would be rumble strips, which would act as a marker for anyone with visibility issues. So, yeah, that one there in the middle. The other thing I wanted to ask, because I realised when I saw the photograph and the plan, is that the path hasn't been completed, because the path ends where it says proposed gate with signage on the left, and then it turns into gravel and doesn't go up round the corner like it suggests it will in the plan. And so are there any intentions to complete the path to cover the area where it was? And the other thing is, as Councillor Keane has said, we had to go along the KCC adopted path to get to this path, and that in itself was a hazard. And to anyone who thinks that KCC adopting this path, I'm going to say, be wary of what you wish for. However, on that basis, that is clearly a strong thing for the residents, has been represented by the councillors. I will ask, is it possible to go back to KCC and find out exactly what would be needed to make this path adoptable? Thank you.
So to come back on the question of the footpath into the site, into the actual housing development. So I think if I go to the actual housing development, so with the footpath itself, it is planned at the end of this bit, obviously this is slightly different because this has now changed, that it will wrap around the corner to then allow a crossing point into the development. Obviously the development itself, because of the low speed movement of cars once you're in it, doesn't have a footpath either side of that highway all the way up that slope as you go up, but there will be some further footpath that should be constructed as part of the housing development to wrap around. In terms of the KCC comment specifically about what would be needed to adopt it, KCC would be unlikely to adopt a a footpath that is separated from a highway in terms of the fact that you've got that distance between it, from my general understanding of it. I must admit I don't know whether or not the issue with the gradients at different points causes a concern for them as well. That's what's mentioned in their comment. In terms of what it would take for them to adopt it, I don't know the extent of changes that would need to be made to the existing structure for them to do that. And it may be that because of where it is and the fact that it's divorced from the highway, they may not do it anyway. So it's a separate part of legislation under the Highway Act, so I wouldn't. It's really that would be the next step if this wasn't considered to be acceptable. What they would potentially need to do to it. I think again, I don't really want to get into the sort of either or options. It's really a case of, is this as it is acceptable. And just to come back on the gates again, obviously few members have now mentioned about the gates. Obviously, just to remind members that the motion that's on the table includes the gates as it stands, but obviously we'll see what happens with the debate in terms of if people feel that should be, could be changed.
Thank you. I have Councillor Alban next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't go to the site visit because I wasn't here. So, but I've heard what the members who've been there have said. I just find the KCC have got a bit of a cheek, to be quite honest. Laying down the law on a private footpath that they require these gates to go in, which it's just unheard of. I mean, they won't adopt it, they won't do anything with it, but they want to have a say. Well, I think, excuse me, I think bugger them. I think we have the application, you've got the application for the footpath, let's just deal with the footpath, get rid of the gates because they are a pain, and they will be a pain for users, because they have no purpose, they serve no purpose. So my view, Chair, is I'm in favour of the footpath, listening to what other councillors who've been on the site visit have said, and but without the actual gates, and I'll be more than happy to propose that should the current proposal fall, Chair. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Wing next, please.
I mean, I find it quite strange because I don't know how we can make a decision, because the main question, and I didn't go to the site visit because I was working, but I did go on my own back with my dog. And it was a question I asked at the last planning meeting. We don't seem to have a detailed, conclusive reason for KCC not adopting this footpath. And this is a new footpath, and it's irrelevant what's going on around that footpath, because as we constantly said on this, when we sit in this committee, we have to deal with the application in front of us. So the fact that nearly all footpaths are not maintained by whoever should maintain them is irrelevant. But one of the key problems I have is none of us know why KCC won't adopt it. And until we know that, we can't make a decision. And the other, if we approve this footpath, then I'm really worried. We all have issues in our wards with footpaths and alleys particularly that are not adopted, and trying to get things done 20 or 15 or even 5 years down the line is an absolute nightmare, because nobody will take responsibility for that length of footpath or alley. And I think I would like to say we refuse the application, and we ask KCC to give us a detailed reason as to why they won't adopt it. And if it needs flattening out, then the footpath needs flattening out. And I cannot make a decision because I don't have a clear reason for KCC not adopting it. And I think if we approve this footpath, we're stoking up problems for the residents of Minster further down the line.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on a couple of those points, the planning permission can't require highways to be adopted. So it's a really important point there. Because it's under a separate bit of legislation under the Highway Act. So whilst there was a condition that required a footpath to be constructed in the location shown, there's no requirement for that to have been adopted by KCC. So in terms of refusing an application on the basis that KCC won't adopt it, wouldn't stand up to scrutiny because it's under separate legislation that process is enacted. So the judgment has to be, is what's there considered to be of detriment to highway safety? Now, if that is the case, Councillor Williams is going to want to come back, then that is the decision that members can make if it's considered that it's unsafe for pedestrians. But in terms of a requirement for it to be adopted, that's not something that is the determining factor with regards to the planning decision, in terms of the officer recommendation.
I need to come back because in order to make an educated decision, you need all the facts. And it may not be a planning decision that we can't refuse it because because it's not in the legislation that something has to be adopted. I feel I've been led to believe that one of the reasons there is an issue with this footpath is KCC won't adopt it. And I can't sit here and say that I have been given by the planning department a clear reason as to why KCC won't adopt that footpath. And it seems to be the one thing that's creating all the issues. So although it's not a planning reason, it is critical to decision making.
I just want to come back. I'm just going to read from the highway comment, which is stating that from the officer, having visited the site, it is evident that the footpath is not constructed to adoptable standards due to its alignment and levels. So specifically, as mentioned, the alignment is the fact that it's separated from the highway and that it runs as it does. The levels is exactly what we've talked about, the gradients that have changed and the camber either side. So that is the primary concern. I think it's really important that is the concern about the safety aspect of things. And obviously that's why it's useful that members obviously have walked it and seen what it's like, and that's what the judgment has to be based on. Thank you, Chair.
I've got Councillor Bayford next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I was away at the time of the site visit as well, so I'm listening with interest to what members have to say. I had no problem with the footpath itself at the last meeting, but I do believe that the points raised about the gates are cogent, and I think perhaps if there is a possible alternative to ask KCC to remove that requirement, that would be very, very useful. Thank you.
Councillor Matterface.
Just out of interest, the road on the actual development, is that a private road, i.e. maintained by the people who live in the houses?
Yes, that's correct. It's part of the management company that also oversee the footpath.
Can I just quickly, so the people who live there will presumably pay to a management company to maintain the road on the development and to maintain this footpath, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Do I have any other comments or questions? In that case, then, we need to go to the vote. So I put the officer's recommendation for approval as it stands to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That is lost. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Alban, you indicated just now that you would want to make a proposed motion.
Yes, Chair. And I propose that we approve the application with the amendment that the gates are not part of that application. And even listening to what Mr Livingston and what Councillor Wing has just said, for it to go back to officers to ensure that KCC remove their requirement of the gates, and they accept that. Although I think, no, sorry, it just comes sparking back in again now, that really, we don't need KCC's consent. Can I just come and have a...
Just to come back on that before, I appreciate you'll need a seconder for the motion, but just to confirm, members can approve it and change the planning conditions. We don't need to get KCC's approval to do that. So if the motion was, so it would be to approve subject to the conditions, but removing in those conditions the requirement to construct the gates.
Most ably put, Mr Livingston. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask for a point of clarification over the removal of the gates? Clearly KCC have said those gates need to be there to demarcate the area so that people know that that area is not covered by KCC. If we as a committee override KCC and make the decision to remove those gates, who then becomes liable?
So in terms of the signage which identifies who is liable on that land, that's what the signage is stating it will do, and that's the requirement of condition 2. Even if it were to be updated again, it's still only one proposal. We haven't had that seconded, just to be clear about the motion. But the actual requirement for the actual signage itself. Sorry, I just lost my condition. There we go. So yeah, condition 2 has to include basically they have to submit within two months the details of the wording to go on the signage itself, which then is already stated to include basically who is liable, being the management company that we mentioned. So in terms of any liability and effectively, come back to the committee, it's going to be very apparent through that condition who is liable for anything that occurs on that land and who's responsible for that land.
Councillor Alban, would you accept from me as a member of the committee an amendment to your motion to include the rumble strips at the crossing with the farm entrance? Right, so can I have...
I just want to clarify, because I think something that Mr Livingston said earlier did help, I think helped me clarify things, but I just want to check. My understanding is what you said. KCC want this signage on there because they aren't prepared to adopt it because they feel it is unsafe. I think that's what you said.
No, I wouldn't say they haven't stated in their comment, which is, it's in the committee report, they haven't said it's unsafe, they said they wouldn't adopt it. And that's not the same, it's not one or the other.
Right, I need a seconder for the motion. Councillor Keane.
So do you want to clarify what that motion is?
Yes, so I'm now going to ask Mr Livingstone to read the final motion.
Okay, so the motion would be to approve the application subject to safeguarding conditions being enforced, but updated to remove the requirement to provide the gates under conditions 1 and 2, and also to include rumble strips at points of access.
Let's get rid of rumble then.
For and against.
All those in favour? Any against? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5. Any site visits will take place for committee members on the morning of Friday the 5th of January 2024. And the first item is for discussion is item 5A, 22 St Peters Park Road. Speaking against the application, I have Ms Katie Hooper, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm neutral to the application, but we've been in business for 20 years at Broadstairs MOT Centre, which is at 20 St Peters Park Road. It's a Bosch car service garage, and we have high levels of vehicle movements as MOT servicing and repairs. We've made a number of comments to the planning applications that haven't been addressed, so I just would like to gain some clarity on that and to ensure that things are in place before any permissions are granted. So the first of them is that we have a steel structure at Broadstairs MOT Centre, and on the plans there are bin and cycle store towards the right hand side, which borders the left hand side of our building as you look at it. There isn't clarity on what vehicle bollards are going to be in place there and the distance from our steel structure to the bollards. That's important to us because on the other side of that steel structure is equipment and flammable liquids and hazardous chemicals, so it's important that that gets addressed. And if somebody left their vehicle in reverse or first gear, they're going to go straight into the side of our building. So in order to know what whether it's going to be metal posts or wooden barriers is quite an important factor for us to ensure that there's the integrity to our building and it doesn't compromise any safety aspects for our staff and the building itself. In terms of the bin and cycle store, The sides have been addressed that there is a closure, so there is an issue with pest control at the site because of the railway station, so we have pest control measures in place within our establishment. However, if the bin and cycle stores are left with a recess between our building and theirs that a human can't get behind to access, then there's the risk of rubbish and rodents, which won't be very pleasant. There's no mesh that goes across the top, which is what we have through a party wall agreement with our neighbours on the opposite side of us. So I think there needs to be some clarity there, because the seagulls will sit on our roof and they drop stuff down the guttering and down the side of the building. So it needs to be access to be able to clear and remove that. There's also a fire risk there involved if there's a build-up of waste there. That brings us on to being able to access our guttering and any roof repairs from that side because of the location of the bin and cycle store. Could that be replaced to the centre rear of the plans and have parking bays instead where the bin and cycle stores are? What measures have been put in place to prevent the business disruption to us with the number of vehicle movements that we have during the day, and what assurances or insurance will be provided by the building contractor in relation to any impact upon the business, be that physical damage to vehicles or building access and limitations? So we have between 15 and 20 vehicle movements a day. We need some construction materials to be able to stop any debris and dirt on the vehicles, because we don't wish to get customer complaints. We also have 24/7 heavy industrial use on our site. I think it's really important that although soundproofing is mentioned, it doesn't address what soundproofing is there, and the bedrooms look onto our site that will be impacted by noise. There's no mention of soakaway location or if a clyogester is going to be installed and where. We've asked that a number of times. The building allows a 5-metre long car parking space at the front, but the building on the plans doesn't appear to be moved back, so that means vehicles overhang the curbside and cause an obstruction to pedestrians on the walkway. And also there's only 5 parking spaces, but it's 2-bedroom flats, and so that inequality is 10 parking spaces. I know I'm out of time, but there was a lot to cover and it hasn't been addressed in 4 letters. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I will now hand to the Principal Planning Officer to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the application site outlined in red, the St Peter's Park Road running down, up and down to the left of the slide here, the station car park to the rear of the site, and this is Rowan Court, is a block of flats, just the opposite side of the access into the station car park. So this is an aerial view of the site. The site in question is the one with the red blob. The MOT centre next door, which has been mentioned, sits here, the station car park to the rear there. And this is looking onto the site, so we're looking from St Peter's Park Road, so this is the site in question. Again, the station car park can be seen to the rear, and this is the neighbouring garage. So just some photographs of the site. So this is numbers 24, 26 and 28 St Peter's Park Road, and the application site is to the right here. Another view of it, so you can see there is a blank elevation to that property, the adjoining property here, and this is the application site. This is the garage that adjoins the MOT site. Adjoins the application site, and you can see there is an existing access to the left-hand side which has been mentioned, and again a closer view of the application building, the current building, the application site on the left, and the access to the rear of that site and the MOT centre. And now we've walked through the access and we're looking at the rear of the site, and the MOT garage that's been referred to and mentioned is on the right-hand side. You can see the back wall of the application site there, and the planting you can see behind it is actually on the embankment to the station car park and not within the application site. And again, that's the other sort of corner of the application site we've walked around. And you can see, again, the planting is, as I say, out with the site, but as a buffer to the station and the station car park. So that's looking at the side of the application site. You can see that's Rowan Court, you can see behind there, and you can just see the chimney of the adjoining building 24, 26 and 28, St Peter's Park Road. Again, this is looking at part of the rear of the actual application site as it sits. There are, and number 24, 26 and 28, and you can see there is some planting, but it's pretty much self-seeded and not of any particular merit on the application site, and that would be lost in the proposal. And then again, this is just looking back through the gate we walked through. So the access to the side, so you can see the MOT garage is now on the left, and that's the existing building on the application site. So planning permission is sought for the erection of a 3-storey building. We'll have 2 commercial units, E-class, UC E-class, and 5 2-bed flats. And this is the proposed site layout, so you can see the 2 commercial units would sit to the front of the site. There would be a 2-bedroom ground floor flat here in this location here, and with the 2 upper floors to the building, excuse me, having 2 flats each, one at the front and one at the rear, but we'll look at the floor plans in more detail later. So, as has been mentioned, there will be parking for the commercial units, 3 car parking spaces here. There will be the access way coming round as existing, round to a rear parking area. There will be 5 spaces, as has been mentioned, 1 space per flat, and it has been considered suitable to have 5 spaces due to the very sustainable location of the application site. So looking at the building, this is the existing front elevation, well, street scene, so you can see the building in the middle. Here is the application site. This is the proposed building. It would have a height of 10.3 metres in total, and that would be 1.9 metres taller than this building here, so number 24, 26 and 28. And it would be some 3.9 metres taller than the MOT building adjoining it. The materials would be render, red and yellow bricks and reconstituted slate, and those materials are common in the area, and we do not raise an objection to those materials. So this is the existing right-hand elevation, and that's the one that faces currently the MOT centre. And this is a proposed elevation, the same, facing the MOT centre again. As has been mentioned, there are windows, 2 flats fronting or facing the MOT centre. They will be, there is soundproofing, and I'll touch on that, and a noise impact assessment has been carried out. And you may have recalled there is a path that runs for people to walk and access the rear parking area and the garden area from the proposed layout. So the windows here will be obscure glazed because they do serve a residential property, but there are windows that also serve that property to the rear, which will let light and ventilation in. So that's the upper elevation facing onto 24, 26 and 28. And again, this is the elevation as proposed. It will largely be a blank elevation. There are windows, and it's hard to see, but that is a recessed part of the building, and it really serves as service court, and those windows will also be obscure glazed. There are balconies here, but they are some way away from the flank wall of number 24, 26 and 28, and it's not considered there would be any overlooking or sense of enclosure or harm from those. And again, this is the rear elevation as we looked at in the photos of the application site, and this is the proposed elevation, rear elevation. As you can see there, the balconies we looked at earlier. We have got some CGI images of the building. So this is looking at the front. So that's the existing building at 24, 26 and 28. This is the building as you would see it and you can see the different types of materials they're proposing. And then this is another view of it, and we can see the rear view there as well, as proposed under the CGIs. So this is existing floor plan. And then we have the proposed ground floor plan, as has been mentioned. So we've got the 2 commercial units sitting here, and this is the ground floor flat here. These are the obscure windows that were mentioned to prevent people obviously looking into that flat as they walk round to access the car parking area or the bins and cycle storage or the garden area. And you will note actually the ground floor flat here has its own private garden, again to provide amenity space, but also to ensure there is no overlooking into those windows from other people accessing that. So now looking at the first floor, as been mentioned, you've got a flat to the front and a flat to the rear. This is the recessed service sort of quarter of the building. So it has, though it's a deep building, it does have some articulation to the front and to the sides to break it up a bit. And the windows here will be obscured. And the kitchen windows here will also be obscured to prevent any sort of mutual overlooking between flats. And again, the top floor, this is the second floor, and it follows a very similar pattern to the one below. And again, you can see the balconies here and the distance to the actual edge of the site, and then the building that sits beyond, some 2.3 metres beyond that. So it's not considered there would be any issues of sense of enclosure or overlooking from those balconies. And that's just the roof plan of the proposed building. So this is the MOT centre here, and this is the bin and cycle storage that has been mentioned. So there will be a gap between the new enclosure and adjoining owners, and it is not going to be fixed to the building. Some issues have been raised as to maintenance of the building, and some of that does go beyond the scope of planning, and it might be something that needs to be agreed as part of a party wall agreement, and things like pest control would not be subject to the planning consent, so not be a material planning consideration. But I do appreciate they are concerns for the adjoining owners, and that is why things like the party wall agreements are in place for those sort of issues to be resolved. And that's just the elevations of the bin and cycle storage, just to give you an idea. So just to recap, members, so this is numbers 24, 28 sit here, and they lie to the north of the application site. And they are commercial at ground floor level and residential above. The proposed building, as I say, is quite deep, and it would project some 9 metres from the rear of that building. But it is acknowledged that the gap between the buildings remains the same. It is 2.3 metres, and the windows and doors, the closest to that, are again set in another metre or so from that. So it is not considered there would be a sense of enclosure or overlooking or significant loss of light to the residential occupiers of that property. The proposed flats themselves would meet the required nationally described space standards and provide light and ventilation for future occupiers, even with some of those windows being obscure glazed. A noise impact assessment has been submitted, essentially to deal with the issue of having residential above commercial, but also to looking being aware of the MOT and other commercial uses in the vicinity. And this does ensure that future occupiers would have a good standard of accommodation, and does ensure that the MOT centre can operate and is not adversely affected by having a sensitive neighbour of residential development being introduced where there isn't one currently. Environmental Health have agreed the findings of that noise impact assessment, and they raise no objection subject to safeguarding conditions which are set out in the report. Initially, concerns were raised by KCC Highways about a variety of highway issues, including the width of the access road as initially proposed, the size of some of the parking spaces, and they also sought clarification in terms of sweat paths to ensure vehicles can enter and exit the site in forward gear. So amended plans were submitted to, and KCC Highways are now happy with it and raise no objection. As has been mentioned, there are 3 spaces shown here, and they do meet the 5 metre setback, so they do meet the standards secured expected by KCC Highways, and they will be secured for the commercial units by collapsing bollards, so they would be put up when the commercial units would not be in operation. The access road will be partly 2-way, so the widest part here at the beginning, so there would be no need for vehicles to wait on the highway. They could pull in even if something was turning out, and then it does narrow down to a single width as you move into the site, but that width is the same site as the current access road, the narrower width, the single width. So, and as has been seen, it is a current access road which has been used by vehicles, but admittedly not that recently. As has been mentioned, there is 1 space only for each of the flats, but again, it is considered a sustainable location. There are shops and facilities around, and obviously we have the station in nearby as well. And it has been demonstrated by sweat paths, as I say, that vehicles can come and enter in forward gear, so it's not considered there would be an issue in terms of highway safety or parking, and there is parking available on street and in the surrounding area, as well as if more parking was required. As the flats are 2-bed units, there is a requirement for amenity space to be provided, and this is provided, as you can see here, in 2 ways. So you have the private amenity space that we talked about to serve the ground floor flat, but also a communal space here. It is noticed that the communal space is relatively small, but it would effectively allow for clothes drying and some amenity space and sitting out space to serve the occupiers of the flats. And it has, it's a balance of creating the adequate parking and servicing facilities for the flats and the commercial units, and also providing dwellings to add to the housing stock of this district as well. And in this case, we have the undertaking for the required SAM contribution, so the officer recommendation is for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Matterface, thank you. And I have Councillor Garner has already requested to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I am very familiar with this site. It's just up the road from me, and I called it in because I share a number of the concerns that were raised earlier, and I'm familiar with it because there was a planning application here that was refused right at the beginning of the year for a number of reasons that I was hoping that would have all been fully overcome, and I don't believe I can satisfactorily say that they have been. So if I just run through the reasons that the previous one was refused, the first one was because I think it was 1 story higher, the previous application, so it was refused because of height, depth, design and all the rest of it. A floor has been removed, but it's still, I think it's still as high because it's still going up V-shaped at the top. But that could be questionable, I suppose. The adverse impact on the highway is one that I'm really have a concern about. Now, obviously I can see and I've heard KCC Highways seem to have changed their opinion through the course of this. I mean, I find that one of the things I find incredible is this two-way access that's been acceptable is the length of a car. It's no more than the length of a car. So it's basically a car being able to pull in just about over the pavement and wait for anything coming out the other way. And I don't believe that, personally, I don't believe that's acceptable. I don't believe that equals two-way access onto the site. It equals a car being able to pull into a space and wait. And I couldn't quite make out there where the pathway, how wide the pathway is for residents to go up when they get out of their flat, because they want to go and use the communal play space, doorstep play space, which is banked against the side there, which was one of the other reasons why the previous application was refused, because there was a lack of communal doorstep play space. Well, if you live in the bottom flat, you've got a couple of metres to yourself there, but if you live in one of the other 4 flats, you've got to wait maybe in the two-way place for it to be safe to walk up there, and then that seems a totally inadequate space for all the residents to use, especially if they're all hanging their washing out in there. There's not going to be a great deal of space to play in, and I know being right next to the railway car park is not going to be the most pleasant place to go and sit or play in. So I mean, obviously I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have got to say, but at the moment it doesn't seem particularly acceptable to me. And I will also add, from what we heard earlier as well, those 3 cars out the front, I don't care what anybody else says. I walk past there every day. That space is not big enough. I saw a Fiesta type car there just this morning as I was walking out, and that was just about not hanging over onto the pavement. And you get an estate in there, it will be hanging into the pavement, over the pavement. It just isn't acceptable, and I can't see, I assume any delivery vehicles that are going to come to one of those two retail units are going to turn up when there aren't any customers there parked on that space. They certainly can't come after it's shut, because the bollards will be up stopping anyone else using it. And I will just pick up one of the points that was raised earlier by the lady from the garage next door. There was a concern about protection to the side of their building, because there are flammable materials kept on that side of their building, and especially as it's a car parking space. Is there going to be any protections put up against that side? But at the moment, unless I'm looking to be persuaded otherwise, I can't see that this is a good enough improvement on the one that you refused at the beginning of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on one of the points about the parking at the front of the site that's of concern. There is obviously, as you've seen from the photos, that the parking spaces there are existing parking spaces. So this proposal doesn't make it any worse. In terms of effectively thinking of what the impact of the development is, it doesn't worsen the existing situation with regards to those parking spaces. Now, they have been obviously measured in the sense of the plans in terms of what the new building, where the new building goes to give that 5 metre depth. And to your point about the previous application and what that actually had, the parking spaces at the rear, for example, were 4.8 metres depth, and that isn't actually adequate when it comes to KCC's parking standards in terms of the space that they've got. Just in terms of the point about cars turning in and that sort of two-way element, I understand what the point about the the ability to turn in and then be able to adapt in terms of how you've turned in if there is a car coming the other way. The issue with the conflict on the layout as it is that occasions where that actually will happen, because of the number of spaces to the rear, you've only got 5 spaces at the rear, it is minimal in terms of the potential for that conflict to exist. And I think if we were looking at lots of car parking space at the rear of a larger residential development, then I think that there would be more justification to suggest you need much more space for that 2-car passing thing, because there are going to be more occasions where there's going to be that conflict. But obviously they have made provision in this instance. There is an existing route there. Obviously it's not used in the same way. There's a gate, but there is access to the yard at the rear at the moment. The site obviously was filled with vehicles, but it's now been cleared. So again, that's an existing vehicular access that goes down the side. And again, even though there's additional movements clearly to the rear, it's that point about whether or not there's enough conflict to justify there being harm. The one other thing, sorry, just adding on a few things. One thing that has been mentioned is about the bollards that you can see on this plan that you've seen there. So at the moment, there is no condition requiring details of those bollards to be provided to the local authority by condition, because normally we would put a landscaping condition on which would give the technical details of what's going on, but actually that has all been provided through the application for the hard surfacing, where the fences are and all that sort of things. So if members felt that it was necessary for a level of control over what the design of those bollards are, then that is something that could be conditioned, and a condition could be added to any approval to require those details prior to the use or occupation of the building. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I just come back, because thank you for that update. And I can see I can see how in an ideal world that would work if each of the flat occupiers understood that they have 1 car parking space between them, and that every time they have someone coming to visit, they will tell them before they come, you can't park on site, you can't come up and down here. But that isn't going to happen. There will be cars coming up. So there is a need for better access. And it just doesn't weigh up to me that where this was refused previously, because it was single track access, it now is okay to be this extra 5 metres. And I know, because I do know the area, I know what will happen is that although visitors could go and park in the car park round the back, especially on a Saturday when it's free, they won't though. They'll all go down Percy Road opposite, which people do already at the moment. And if there's one thing that people down Percy Road stop and tell me every time I walk down there, is what are you going to do about the parking down this road? And I've said, well, we're going to put another few flats there so that more people can come and park down there. If I was facetious, but I'm not. But.
I'm going to bring back the planning applications manager to answer some of your points.
So sorry, I misspoke when I previously was talking, because there is a condition, which is condition 19, which requires details prior to the occupation of all, including of all walls, fences, or other means of enclosure proposed. So we will get details of the bollards. So sorry, just to confirm, no condition needs to be added. It's already on the recommendation. I think it might be useful, with reference that's been made to the previous refusal, that we show you the previous refusal. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to take control of the screen and just show. So in terms of the previous application, so this was for the commercial units and 7 flats, so it's now 5 flats, and you can see at the rear where there is. It was considered that there not only was it an issue in terms of the parking spaces, as I mentioned, they don't actually accord with highway standards. There wasn't enough room for cars to turn around at the rear. And if I go back, sorry, I have to do this on the other screen. To the actual proposed, you can see obviously the way that it's changed in terms of the number of parking spaces comes down. So again, I appreciate what you're saying about there's still potential for vehicular conflict, but there's less potential with the previous proposal. And obviously there is now a turning area which highways have agreed allows for the 6x6 to turn around there. I mean, the main thing which everyone is in agreement that we are trying to ensure that vehicles are exiting in a forward gear, because everyone knows what St Peter's Park Road's like, therefore we need to make sure that's the case. And again, this is the balance that's been made in terms of the previous application was obviously the reduction in units, the change in design, but also the improvement of the access to the rear. We are in a location where we do expect people to have cars, although it is edge of centre, very close to the town centre. It is sustainable, and therefore we think that this is the balance that you get by getting cars on site and developing the site. So therefore, it's sort of the trade-off here is to get as much safe car parking as you can on site, and that's what we've put it forward on that basis.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Alban next, please.
I thought Councillor Bayford was in front of me, Chair, but doesn't matter.
Had you pretty
Okay.
much together,
Okay.
so...
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to go over what Councillor Garner said. He's made it clear what his things, so I'm not going to repeat those, Chair. The only, well, I'll tell a lie. The only one I would repeat is I am really concerned about where the, at the MOT centre, where they are, the gases and are stored, and you can't expect them to move their storage because they want to build this. So I think there has to be some kind of mitigation there, if it is approved, that is protected. What I wanted to ask, that the two commercial units, it doesn't actually say within there as what their use classes are. So I think that's important as to, I suppose the question is, why haven't we got a firm comment from the developer as to what these will be used as? Or is it that obviously then that they would have to make a separate application for the uses? So in other words, the development is building the units and is controlled under this consent if it's granted, but the use of those are not. So, you know, reading the condition, especially in relation, so if there is, they come in and they want food units, takeaways or whatever, so that will obviously increase traffic, that will increase everything there. So I think that is a concern that I have, Chair. And I just wonder if the officers could answer that. Thank you.
They're Class C, use Class C, so that does cover a number of different things. So it could be, for example, retail, it could be a cafe, it could be a number of things that are covered by use Class C.
Chair, can I come back? So can I just confirm, it may be me that I've missed it in the conditions, but could you point out where it says that in the conditions?
Thank you. In that case, it's Councillor Bayford, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think this is less dominant than the previous application, and actually I think it's very well designed to accommodate both commercial units and 5 very much needed flats. Efforts have been made to make the living viable with amenity spaces. There have been improvements to the parking provision, but this is an issue everywhere, especially in our towns. I think I would like to support this application, subject to some of the conditions raised by our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I had Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. Some of what I was going to say has already been said. On the assumption the outline of the building is as the existing former computer repair place, I know perfectly well, like Councillor Garner, that you can walk along there, could walk along there when it was in operation and vehicles were overhanging the pavement, and that is a concern. St Peter's Park Road is very difficult to park in. There's double yellow lines, there's a lot of businesses there, and I have concerns that 2 commercial units with only 3 parking spaces, depending what they are, I just don't think it's sufficient. And I am concerned also with the 5 spaces at the rear, which I know they've reduced the number and everything, but where are all the other people going to park? Because as Councillor Garner said, Percy Road, Walmsley Road, Edith Road are always very heavily parked up, and I've just had visions of more sort of conflict there. But that's the only thing. The other points have been covered.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on the highways points, I understand members are concerned about a combination of the commercial and also the parking at the rear. I mean, in terms of the commercial that's being created, obviously there is a large commercial unit there that obviously generates vehicle movements at the moment. In terms of the parking for that unit, obviously you've got spaces at the front. That's obviously being replicated, just as a number of businesses along there have parking at the front. If a car is driving along there and there are no spaces at the front in terms of the business aspect, they won't park in front, or they won't, they wouldn't be anywhere to park for them. So again, that's not necessarily, I think, a point of conflict from our perspective. In terms of parking provision at the rear and the arrangement, in terms of thinking about highways and their comments specifically, their comments are specifically referencing the fact that it is in a location, as I mentioned earlier, that is walkable to everything. This is something, therefore, that we have to be mindful of in terms of any potential refusal on insufficient parking or inadequate and unsafe, because, again, highways haven't objected on a safety ground in terms of that working relationship with the access that's there at the moment and the parking at the rear and manoeuvring around. So, again, it is about a balance being struck here, whether or not you are trying to provide the parking or not, because we are in a location where I think there would be a strong argument if there was no parking whatsoever that an applicant could put forward. It's not in the town centre, but it is, it's well served by a number of things. We do feel this is the correct balance. I just wanted to touch on one point because of what Councillor Bayford has said about the sort of what's been mentioned. So just to confirm, obviously the bollards and the details of the bollards in terms of where they are, they've obviously been specifically put there, is something that is going to be subject to condition to ensure that they are installed, prior to the use of that building. Just to pick up one of the points that Annabelle has also mentioned about the recommendations of the noise impact assessment. So some of those recommendations include the fact that you've got double glazed windows to living rooms and bedrooms, but rather than normal glazing, it's thickened glazing. So at the moment, if you're looking at a normal single glazed window, you're looking at about 3mm depth. You're looking at 6mm depth for the first pane, a gap, and then 4mm depth. So there are a number of requirements. It's not a standard build to ensure that there is there is clear mitigation in terms of that relationship with the neighbouring property. And Annabelle's obviously already mentioned about what's potentially covered by other legislation, be it Party Wall Act, or indeed, if there are issues with, pest rodents, that is something that Environmental Protection would look at. And sorry, just my final point, there is a construction management plan condition. One of the requirements of that is to look at dust control measures, and that is obviously something that's been mentioned as part of it. So not only is that covered by parts of the Environmental Protection Act generally in terms of human health, dust control measures in this instance could obviously help to mitigate any impact from construction in terms of, not just one business on one side, but just generally in the area. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Wing next, please.
I'm not going to mention anything that's been mentioned before, but I'd just like to maybe some clarification about party wall agreement. Is the bin and waste store, clearly it can't be attached to a metal-clad building, so is there a gap between there? And if there is a gap between, I thought party wall agreement was to do with when you're actually trying to do something to your neighbour's wall, and if there's a gap, can party wall agreement then be used to try and deal with that gap? And the other thing that worries me is there's a bin store. So, I mean, there you've got, I'm assuming there'll be one bin per household. They'll be dragged out. They'll be dragged out once a week and put on the highway somewhere, or on the to be emptied. Are we not then filling the two-way passing gap and possibly the shop's parking store and possibly the pavement, with bins that are required to be brought forward onto the highway for our great waste teams to empty them. So is there not another hazard down the line there?
So just to come back on the first point with regards to, potential, you're right in the sense of that in terms of physical alterations to something that either abuts or is in fact connected to, is usually what the Party Wall Act covers. In this instance, there is a gap. So this is the drawing that shows there is a gap because, as you say, it's actually attaching to it is arguably a bit more of a problem because it's very difficult to do that. The annotation here indicates, and I think it's on the elevation as well. It's not on this elevation, but there's a panel that's put at the rear, basically on this annotation, that would basically extend up to the boundary but abut it to try and basically minimise the potential for things such as animals or things to go down there. I think with regards to how that would be dealt with, as Annabelle said earlier, it's not a planning consideration that we would look at in terms of the design of buildings. It's something that can happen. I mean, I think everyone may have had experiences with pests such as rats or mice, but that is something that then would be looked at again by other legislation. Obviously, we don't want to create a situation where we are resulting in something happening, but that isn't the case here. The main thing is that it's set away. The point about maintenance is something that would be subject to the relationship between the landowner, in this instance, the management company, with regards to that area at the rear, and the neighbouring property. And so it's not something that we can mandate through the planning conditions. Your point about bin storage is something that has been looked at because the waste and recycling team have commented on it. And this is where the actual width of the access is key, because the width of that access is 3.7 metres, which basically allows for a vehicle to very comfortably pass down it. And there is a section of land as well that indicates that there is a strip where bins would be collected on the day of collection, which Waste and Recycling team have agreed, because they have a carry distance that they obviously would walk from the highway to collect and go back. So it's too far for them to go to actually the bin storage at the rear, so they do need to be moved closer. Now, I appreciate that we are then reliant on people putting it in the right place, but that is no different from just a normal householder putting the bin in the right place and for it to be collected. And that's something that the Waste and Recycling team would effectively pick up. And obviously, if bins aren't presented where they can collect them, they won't collect them, and they're justified in not doing that. So we do feel like, again, this is a balance that allows for bins to be stored at the rear rather than have a bin store that's on the front of the property, which I know that waste recycling colleagues would prefer we had, but for a design reason, we do usually look to relocate at the rear, with then a collection area first of all, and we further close to the road. We do think that there is enough manoeuvrability to get a car still down there without having that blocked basically by bins being stored there.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Is this echoing? It sounds echoing
like it all
to
the
me.
time. Yeah.
Right, thank you. I mean, having listened to it all, I'm not sure there's planning reasons for refusal. I think there's a number of points in the design that are disappointing, and in particular, can you just tell me, I know it's not, well, I don't believe that there's a sort of minimum play spacing, but what size is that communal play space? Because it looks really tiny to me, and as I say, I appreciate that's still not a planning refusal reason, but I would be curious.
Just get Annabelle to she's just measuring it. I think the width is it looks from eye. It's sorry, I need to get the scale rule out of my bag. Sorry.
Good questions like this make them work.
Oh, no, that's actually saying on it. I can't read it.
Oh, it's 32 square metres. But what's the scale on that?
I think it's 1 for 100.
Yeah, it looks about 2 metres wide, doesn't it? Yes. So just to confirm, in terms of the width at the sorry, I'm not on the mic. The width to the biggest point, yeah, here on the plan is basically about 2.3 metres wide. The depth, though, is obviously quite long in terms of being 13. So you're looking at about, it's got down on the plan, it's about 32 square metres. To your point, Councillor Keane, you're absolutely right. There is no minimum standard. And yeah, this is, I appreciate you've heard officers say this a few times. The balance here is to get the parking. And we have this in town centres, we have this in areas just outside town centres. You know, we are trying to get that balance, and sometimes we can't achieve everything, but we do feel like this is enough space to have closed drying facilities, having a closed line, to support the flats above. Again, one of the issues that Councillor Garner mentioned this earlier with the previous application is that you didn't have any play space or any doorstop play space, and it was 7 flats. So again, you've got 5 here, one of which does have its space at the rear, and it's those 4 flats that are above that do have this narrow space.
Councillor Matterface.
Just a very quick point. If you go in the railway station car park, over the little bridge, you're in the Memorial Park, which has quite a lot of play space. But that's just...
And can I just check, the bin collection point, will that be clearly marked so that people know that that is where they've got to put their bins? And I hate to come back to this, but I am concerned at the bin storage area next to a point where the neighbours are saying pest control is a problem. I know that was said just now that it's not a material planning consideration around the pest control and the party wall agreements, but if that is likely to cause a problem for the residents here with their bin storage in that area, would that be something that we would need to consider?
So to the first point, the landscaping condition covers the hard surfacing. So in terms of the plan that you can see on here, it can be looked at in terms of denoting on the ground a change in surface material as part of the landscaping condition. In terms of the point about where the bin storage is, there's nothing inherent in bin storage, in terms of where it is on a site, if that would necessarily result in a direct impact, that would be justified or significant enough to refuse an application with regards to resulting in pests. I must admit, it's something that I haven't come across as a suggestion, frankly, that would warrant a refusal of an application, because obviously there are bin storages, and in this instance it is enclosed. It is in an enclosure. And again, there are measures under the Environmental Protection Act and the Environmental Protection Team look at with regards to pest issues. So it's not something that would result in an impact from this development to warrant refusal, in our view.
Councillor Alban.
Yeah, very, very quickly, Chair. Having listened to everything, I'm mindful that I think on balance that I would vote to approve it, but that would need to be subject to the protection of the gases area of the MOT centre, and I'd like that as a condition, if that's at all possible.
So from the discussion earlier, obviously the purpose, as far as I understand it, of why those bollards have been placed there relate to that, as far as I understand it from the submission, taking account of the comments that were made during the course of the application and previous applications. So that's why the bollards are going to be subject to that landscaping condition. And again, the importance here is that actually they're not just a metal post, that we actually are looking at something that's more substantial, that offers that protection. So that is something that obviously we can feed back in the conditions submission with the conditions officer to make that clear.
Okay, I don't have any other speakers, so we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. The next item on the agenda is item 5C, land adjacent to 198 Monkton Street, Monkton. For public speaking in favour of the application, I have Ms Annabel Gerlach. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Annabel Gerlach. I'm actually the resident of 198 Monkton Street and developer of 198A Monkton Street. Firstly, I want to reiterate that all tools are down and nothing has gone forward since the summer until this matter is resolved. Secondly, I want to bring to light that there are no conditions attached to the planning permission that could not go through permitted development for the loft and the Stingle extension. Also, I'd like to bring to attention the council scheme was utilised for this build as well. Plans provided to me by the architect were simply built, and I was given the go-ahead by them. The Velux window at the top of the property is very acute and thus wouldn't have an intrusion to any neighbours or land adjacent or to the rear of the property. And the rear of the property is farmland and woodland. The access to the back of my property, and that is the utilities pathway, has been gridlocked. So that is very dormant land and has actually overgrown to the degree that I've actually had to maintain it myself because it's excessive and it comes over the back fence of both of the properties. So there's nobody there that could, be intrusioned upon at all by the dormer. I'd also like to bring to attention in Monkton Street there are many dormer windows too. Spaces, parking spaces, there is ample parking spaces on the front of the property, and also I'm eager to get going on this property and just get the front cleared up for all the local residents. So I would like to get this moving as quick as possible. It's been, some time been delayed and tools have been down. So I'd really appreciate your consideration for this to be warranted, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1, Councillor Banbridge.
Smith first.
Okay, Councillor Smith instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for hearing us on this. I've been approached by Monkton Parish Council and they apologise that they are unable to be here this evening due to prior commitments. Had they been, they would wish to make members aware of the following: that the Parish Council has always opposed development on this site based on overdevelopment, impact on neighbouring properties and lack of adequate off-street parking provision. Over recent years, 3 applications have been submitted for this site, each progressively larger. The first was for a 2-bedroom property, then a 3-bedroom property, and now a 5-bed property. Clearly, the plot size has not increased, so the development has become increasingly cramped and imposing. The parish has 2 major concerns with the current application: overdevelopment and parking. I'll speak to overdevelopment. This is an extremely narrow plot. To increase the size of the house from 3 to 5 bedrooms, a substantial rear extension has been added, rather than is proposed to be added, together with development of the roof space. This puts the development out of kilter with adjacent properties, leaving it with minimal separation, a very small rear garden and no front garden at all. In the report, officers state the proposals will not significantly alter the footprint, whereas a rough estimate of the plans shows that they actually increase the footprint by at least 1/3. The Parish Council consider this to be very significant alteration to the footprint, highlighting concerns regarding overdevelopment and the resulting impact, including overlooking of the neighbouring properties. And specifically, the parish mentions that it will overlook 200A, or does overlook 200A. My sense is that, and without being able to see the rear of the property, my sense is that it is overbearing, out of scale and out of kilter with the rather modest bungalows which typify the village of Moncton. And I will leave it to Councillor Banbridge to talk about parking, but I would say that, okay, in that case, I'm going to leave it to Councillor Banbridge to talk about parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got the microphone now. Okay, so yes, Moncton Parish Council's been very concerned about this. The Kent Design Guide states properties of 4+ bedrooms should be allocated 3 parking spaces in a rural location. This is a rural location, yet only 2 off-street parking spaces are provided in the plans. The guide does suggest these requirements can be mitigated where sustainable travel links are evident, but Moncton does not have sustainable travel links. There's very infrequent bus service, mainly for school runs, and nothing at all in the evenings. And that's it. So Moncton is very dependent on cars and, in this rural community. There's been an emergence of 4- and 5-bedroom new builds in the village in the last few years, and as a result, Moncton has experienced a huge increase in traffic congestion. So it's important to adhere to these rules around parking spaces. Any sort of on-street parking resulting from this development will impact on a very narrow section of Moncton Street. Will also compromise the awkward junction with Middle Lane directly opposite the site. The applicant has permission for a 3-bedroom property. We feel anything larger than this will result in an unacceptable impact on neighbouring properties and will cause an overspill of parked cars in a narrow lane wholly unsuited for further parking. And so we would ask that this amended application is refused on the reasons stated by Councillor Abby Smith and myself. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now hand to the Principal Planning Officer to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this is the application site outlined in red. We have blue land here, 198, which is land in the same ownership as the application site. And this is Moncton Street running across the slide here, and that is Miller's Lane running up there. So this is an aerial view of the site, so we can see Miller's Lane, and this is the application site here. And members will be aware, and it's been raised again, that planning consent was granted in 2021 for the erection of a 3-bed, 2-storey dwelling on the site. And this application seeks to vary condition 2 of that consent, which was the approved plan conditions, to allow the erection of a single-storey rear extension, a rear dormer window, and essentially to create a 5-bedroom dwelling. So, and the application, as has been mentioned, is part retrospective. It's a substantial amount of work has been undertaken, but it's not complete. So this is the front of the property with the dwelling, as you can see, as I say, already partly constructed. This is the rear of the site, this is 200 Moncton Street to the left. As you can see, it's a 2-storey dwelling, number 200, and it has a rear extension, single-storey here. And you can see, we're looking at the application site here, that it is under construction and the dormer is partly taking shape there. And this is looking from the garden, essentially, of 198. So again, you can see the dormer and it's being built out, and you can see there is a small addition here to 198 with a window set there. So this, I'm going to do a lot of comparison between this application before us and the previous one, so members can get a feel as to what has changed. So this is a block plan that was approved in 2021. So as you can see, the dwelling here, parking to the front and a garden area to the rear. So this is the block plan for the proposed dwelling that we're considering tonight. So again, it has a similar format, the dwelling. This is the extension that's been mentioned here. This is the original house, the house is approved in 2021, and again there would be parking to the front and a garden area to the rear. So this is the front as approved in 2021. The front elevation that we're now looking at. This is the rear elevation as approved in 2021, and this is where this is the proposed rear elevation. So this is where the main changes are going to, obviously, are taking place. So the rear single-storey extension is flat roofed, as you can see here, with a lantern. It runs the width of the dwelling and has a depth of 4 metres, and it increases the depth of the dwelling to 15.8 metres. So this is the side elevation. Sorry, let's go back to that one. I haven't told you about the dormer. The overall height of the dwelling would remain the same, so that's 8.3 metres, but the eaves height would increase from 4.7 metres to 5 metres. The dormer would be set down from the ridge by 0.2 metres, and from the edge of the roof by 0.15 and 0.2 metres. And the extension would actually have a height of 3.3 metres and 3.7 if you include the lantern. And given the location of the dormer and the extension to the rear and the fact they are flanked by other dwellings, they're not highly visible from public vantage points, so, and as such it's considered there would not be any adverse impact from approving them on the character and appearance of the area. So that's the side elevation as approved in 2021 that faced 198 Monckton Street, and this is it before us now. So you can see the dormer here and the additional extension here. This is the other side elevation, so facing onto number 200, as approved in 2021. And this is what we're now considering, so the extension here with the lantern and the dormer here. And so looking at the floor plans, this is, it was 2-storey as approved in 2021. And this is what's now before us for consideration. So we now have the 3 stories essentially, so and this is the extension that's being proposed, and this third floor would be created by means of that dormer, facilitating additional floor space there. So the proposed dwelling would be served by 2 off-street parking spaces to the front, and it would also have a private rear garden. As has been mentioned in the previous item, there are no space standards for garden sizes, and it still would have a usable garden space for amenities, sitting out, clothes drying, etc., doorstep play space. Mention has been made about concerns that it should be served by more than 2 parking spaces. There is only room on site for 2 parking spaces, but there is parking available along Monckton Street, and so it is considered that it is acceptable to have 2 parking spaces in this instance. In terms of the living conditions of adjoining occupiers, it is noticeable that whilst the overall height of the dwelling would not change, the form of the roof does change to accommodate the dormer, but is not considered to be significantly harmful to the residential amenities of adjoining occupiers. The dormer windows, the windows in the dormer itself would look out over the rear garden and then onto countryside, as has been mentioned, and is not considered that they would be any worse than the rear windows in the first floor that have already been approved. It's not considered there would be any loss of light or sense of enclosure from the proposed development, especially given that the rear elevation is south-facing and the actual position of the dwelling within the site does not change. So the officer recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Driver. And I've got one hand I've already had up for speaking, Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can see nothing wrong with this at all. I'll go along with the officer recommendation for approval. I think what needs to be taken into account that should they have built it as it was, firstly approved, that probably the rear extension would be permitted development, the loft conversion would be permitted development, and the rear dormer window would be permitted development. So they could have done this without any consent whatsoever after the building was built. So I could see no reason to refuse it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Could I ask Mr Livingstone to just come back and confirm that what you have said is true? I know, but I want him on record as saying it.
Okay. So yeah, rear dormer windows, it's a cubic content issue in terms of whether or not it's permitted development. It's a detached property, so they've got 50 square metres to work with. So it doesn't go any higher than there's a gap of more than 20 centimetres from the eaves to the start of the dormer. So yeah, that looks like it would be permitted development. Obviously, it's tile hung. Sorry, it's not been tile hung yet, but it will be tile hung, and obviously that's the bit that has to match in terms of a similar appearance. In terms of the rear extension, again, it's a detached property, so that allows you to go out the 4 metres in depth. It's 2.6 metres to the eaves, so it is it's not at a height of 3 metres, which if it was 3 metres within 2 metres of the boundary, then they've got a bit more of an issue, and it's not PD. So from looking at the plans this evening, I would say those two developments would be permitted if they were. And obviously the situation has presented itself because it's simply been constructed at the same time as the dwelling was constructed.
Do I have any other questions or comments? Councillor Garner.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I mean, as you know, I take a keen interest in what Kent Highways say about planning applications. So I've had a look at the Kent Highways, the latest of two submissions. Now, on there, they say that they confirm that provided the following requirements are secured by condition or planning obligation, then I raise no objection. And there are two, well, there's more than two. There are a couple of things that I've noticed. They're asking for the submission of a construction management plan before the commencement of any development. And I can't see it on this one. Was there one on the one that's already got planning permission? And because I couldn't see that. And the location of the telegraph pole removal position. We haven't heard anything about that in the report or anything. I just wondered if you could put my mind at rest about the telegraph pole.
The construction management plan was attached, the condition was attached to the original application, and they did submit that and it was approved, and obviously works have commenced, so we've not sought to reapply that. Sorry, I've lost the other one now. Yeah, the telegraph pole has already been moved to allow access to the front to allow for parking. So if I go back to the photograph, you can just see it on the edge of the photograph in this location here. Previously it was pretty much in the middle of the application site, so it's already been moved, so we have not reimposed that condition.
So that's great, thank you very much. So that does sort of make me wonder, maybe it doesn't impact this application, but you know, KCC Highways sent in that submission on the 23rd of November, which is only a couple of weeks ago, asking for a couple of things that have already been delivered. I mean, do they not realise that these things have been done before they do it? It's sort of one of the things that makes me worry about what KCC Highways actually say to us.
I understand what you're saying there. I mean, the paragraph at the start of the highway comment talks about, it may have already been relocated in terms of the telegraph pole specifically. Obviously, in this instance, the assessment's been done on the basis of the plans. I wouldn't expect KCC to need to visit the site to actually give a consultation comment. So that's why they've asked for the reimposition. I must admit, I kind of agree with the construction management plan point, but again, it's KCC would not have appreciated necessarily that the works actually have got to the stage that they have, so hence they've recommended it. So I'm not trying to defend KCC necessarily, but just to give some context around it.
Councillor Matterface, did you want to?
We assume the applicant had to pay to have that moved. It must have been pretty expensive.
Okay, it doesn't look like I've got any more comments. We'll now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? Were there any others, abstentions or against? No. In that case, that is carried. Now, members, we have one more item on the agenda for tonight and then the reserve list. Does anyone want for a 5-minute comfort break? As it is now 10 to 9. Yeah, we are going to take a 5-minute comfort break. Thank you. It doesn't matter who says it, Councillor Alban. I take no notice of you. Right, I think we're all back now, so we're going to go on with item 5G, Vattenfall land at Port of Ramsgate Royal Harbour approach in Ramsgate. I have, speaking in favour of the application, Mr Doug Moulton. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, members. The proposed platform is a simple structure measuring 11.5 by 22 metres to the south of the existing Vattenfall offices. The development is fully compliant with local plan policy SP11, which supports port-related development. The Port of Ramsgate is a major economic driver in the locality, with offshore wind being a vital component. The Council recognises the importance of the port, with levelling up funding sought to invest and so create a green port, including the support of the renewable energy sector. The applicant operates 10 offshore wind farms. Offshore wind is a critical component of the country's energy mix and in delivering net zero 2050. Accordingly, the maintenance of the existing wind turbines is key to maximising renewable energy generation. The boat platform is required to facilitate the efficient operation and maintenance of the Kentish Flats Extension and Thanet offshore wind farms, with a total capacity of 440 megawatts. Currently, Vattenfall sends vessels across from the marina to the link span and then offshore, and London Array use a pontoon located about 200 metres southwest of their yard. Not a practical or efficient setup. The facility will be in joint use with London Array, so the structure has maximum operational benefit. The development will be installed at a fixed height matching the level of the adjacent dock. The only part of the development that will be visible is the hydraulic cranes, with cranes already present within the harbour. The development already benefits from a marine management licence granted in March 2022. There was no statutory objections to the application, with no objection from either Ramsgate Town Council or the Heritage and Design Forum, with no letters of objections from any local residents. The construction of the platform is short, being only circa 7 weeks using a modular build, and will take place between April and September, so outside of overwintering birds. The construction methodology of the platform is clearly set out in a detailed construction environmental management plan, which is correctly referenced in the draft conditions. This document, alongside the Shadow Habitats Regulation Statement, has been agreed by both Natural England and the Council Ecologist as appropriate to mitigate any limited potential environmental impacts, specifically around birds within the harbour. A highways technical note was submitted in support of the application, which demonstrates there is sufficient car parking available at the existing office. The development will not be a generator of new vehicle trips, but will allow the workforce a better facility which can be more easily and efficiently board boats, and then with the necessary equipment to facilitate the offshore wind farms. It is considered that the proposed fixed boat landing platform fully accords with the local plan, constitutes sustainable development, and we respectfully request that councillors support the officer recommendation and approve the planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. The Planning Applications Manager will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for a landing platform for vessels connected with the operation of the wind farms by Vattenfall. So we're looking at the Port of Ramsgate. The landing platform will be in the location that previously had pontoons, which were end of life and have been removed subsequently. So if we look at the next image, you'll see an aerial view of where this platform would be. So the main planning considerations are the principal development, the impact on the character, appearance of the area, and the impact on the environment. As mentioned, obviously there was a previous pontoon that was used for these facilities. The new platform would be constructed via 15 steel tubular columns, which would be piled into the harbour floor. The platform itself is 11.5 metres by 22 metres. You have the cranes that the applicant has mentioned in 2 locations across the platform. You've also got access ladders at 3 points down the platform as well, but the actual level of the platform is at the same level of the dock. So in terms of the principle of development, it's acceptable then to policy SP11, It is a port-related need, and therefore it's supported by that principal policy. There's no impact on the character and appearance of the area. It's entirely appropriate to have this type of development in this area visually. In terms of the impact on the environment, the applicant did do pre-app with us, and we advised on the previous experience that we'd had with regards to other developments in the port. And so a construction management plan has been submitted as referenced, which includes particular measures to mitigate the impact of construction on bird species linked to the designated sites in the area. So again, as mentioned, there's a condition which requires that no piling works can occur between September and March, the use of soft start piling to minimise disturbance when it does occur, a pre-commencement bird survey to occur, and also a marine mammal observer to be present. KCC Biodiversity have agreed with the measures, as well as Natural England in agreeing the shadow habitat regulations assessment, which is appended to the report. And overall, the recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions and the adoption of the appropriate assessment at Annex 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I move the officer's recommendation as adopted. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Keane. And does anyone want to speak? Councillor Wing.
I can see they've consulted with the Marine Management Organisation, and a marine licence was issued. So I feel quite confident that everything's in place to ensure that people and our environment are as protected as they can be during this assessment. I did read at one point that some of the construction might occur during the nesting season, but the works will be halted, and they'll ensure that birds are fledged before they restart work. So it does seem that every little bit is every little thing is being taken into consideration to ensure that everybody's protected and everything is protected.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree entirely with Councillor Wing. I think that there's absolutely no reason to refuse this application. I think there's a construction management plan. Every attempt has been undertaken to protect the environment, so I'd like to support it. Thank you.
Anyone else? In that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. So that concludes the public speaking for this meeting. Councillor Alban, you have declared an interest. Before you go, can I just ask you if there are any other items on the reserve list that you would wish to reserve for speaking? No. Okay. If you would just remain until we get to the end. No, you leave. You just remain outside. Let me finish the sentence. If you remain outside, and then if anything is reserved, we can call you back in. So,
Once he passes the threshold.
I can read this bit.
No. Oh, are you going to read this?
I'm now calling upon the clerk to read out the remaining planning applications. If a member wishes to reserve an application, will they please call out as the clerk reads? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we have AO4, 7 Eastern Esplanade Broadstairs. Yes, AO5, East Pier Building, East Pier Ramsgate. AO6, East Pier Building, East Pier Ramsgate again. AO8, Brunswick Hall, Hardres Street, Ramsgate. And AO9, Jackie Baker's Recreational Ground, Highfield Road, Ramsgate. Thank you.
Can I have a proposer to move that the applications that have not been reserved be determined in accordance with the officer's recommendation? Councillor Rattigan, and a seconder, Councillor Keane. Do members agree? Thank you. So for the benefit of the public, I will call upon the clerk to read out the applications that have been determined.
Thank you, Chair. So to confirm, that's AO5, East Pier Building, East Pier Ramsgate. AO6, East Pier Building, East Pier Ramsgate. AO8, Brunswick Hall, Hardres Street, Ramsgate. And AO9, Jackie Baker's Recreational Ground, Highfield Road, Ramsgate. Thank you.
And can someone attract Councillor Alban to come back in, please? Okay, thank you. It's item A04, and I'm going to ask for the officer to present the application.
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal is for the erection of a single-storey side and rear extension at number 7 Eastern Esplanade, and also a two-storey outbuilding to the rear. So you can see the property marked by the red on the Google image here. So it's on the corner of Eastern Esplanade and Dickens Road. So this is the site outlined in red. So you can see that there are 2 points of vehicular access at the site at the moment. One, an access on Eastern Esplanade, and one on Dickens Road. So this is the front elevation of the property on Eastern Esplanade. And this is the existing garage on Dickens Road, with the neighbouring property on Dickens Road in the image on the right. So just to show the relationship between the development and the neighbouring property on Eastern Esplanade, you can see that you've got a distance on one side of the boundary and then another to the actual side elevation of the main building. So this is a view now looking towards the sea. So we're looking the opposite angle that we were just looking at. So the application property is on the left and the neighbouring property is on the right. So you can see just at the top of your image, top of the above the fence here, you can see there's a communal entrance which accesses the flats in the neighbouring property. There are 3 flats which were approved a number of years ago for a conversion of that property. And then you've got the rear-facing windows in that property at ground and first floor level, and also at roof level. This is a view a bit further back, showing that relationship again. And now we're going to just look at the rear, where the 2-storey outbuilding is proposed. So this is actually a view from the existing first floor of number 7 Eastern Esplanade, looking down towards the existing single-storey structure, and you can see the full depth of the neighbouring property on Dickens Road. And then in more close-up detail, you can see the existing relationship. There is a side window at the moment that you can see obscured by the single-storey building. Just getting up close, it's an obscure glazed window, so it's considered as a non-habitable room window there for the side of the dwelling. And then this is a view further back to the left, the back left corner of the property, showing the relationship with the plot and the neighbour on Dickens Road. This is a view outside the existing vehicular access on Dickens Road from where that garage is currently served. Okay, so now if we look at the propose itself, so as mentioned, there's a side and rear extension which wraps around the property. There is also the creation of a terrace area at first floor, which we'll look at on the elevations, and then there is a new 2-storey outbuilding at the rear. This has been slightly changed from the current location of the garage and is set back by a number of metres from the front, and it's the 5 metres again that we've talked about earlier, being set back from the pavement on Dickens Road. So just having a little look overall at the floor plans, the existing is on the left, the proposed is on the right. So to look at this in a bit more detail, just look at that front, the main building. So what you've got, the Eastern Esplanade is at the top of the screen, so you've got views when we look at the elevations on pretty much every elevation of the extension, because it's the side and the rear. So you've got an outcrop here, and then there's a glazed link which is actually set back from the frontage of the property to link to this single-storey side element, and then the rear and side element wraps around at the back. And then on the first floor plan, you can see that there's a lantern light on the extension. There's no accommodation, there's no balcony above the single story element in the main bit of the side, but there is in part at the rear of the building itself, and they've created a terrace proposed. Now, previously this was larger. It was amended as part of the application with the officer securing amendments. They are proposing to have a 1.8 metre high screen along the side elevation to avoid overlooking to the neighbouring property in Eastern Esplanade. And then this is the second floor, just showing basically a reorientation of existing accommodation within there. Existing. So front elevation, you've got a couple of changes here. Not only have you got the actual extension, but they're also removing the existing enclosure around the balcony. So the actual bay window that's at first floor is there at the moment, but the enclosure around it that we saw on the photo has been removed. I mentioned about the glazed link, which is set back from the frontage. That's where the mouse pointer is there, and you can see the front elevation of the structure. So we are in an area which has come over the Broadstairs neighbourhood plan, which is one of the seafront zones, and one of the requirements of that, just as it is with our own policy QDO2, which is to make sure the materials are matching. That's what's been proposed in terms of the facing materials as well as the roof. In terms of the side elevation, so this is the elevation actually on Dickens Road. You've got the rear extension part of that, which comes out where the access door out to the garden is. And then on the rear elevation, so this is the elevation that we saw with the image looking back towards the sea. You can see that where that terrace is at first floor, where then you've got the 1.8 metre high timber louvered guarding rail, which to obscure the views to the neighbouring property. And this is important to see that the relationship with the neighbouring property, the development is in close proximity to the boundary with the property on Eastern Esplanade. You're looking at a height of 2.5 metres to the eaves height, and then pitching away from that. So when you look at the next elevation, which is the elevation that actually faces the neighbouring property, now bear in mind obviously that this spans from the front all the way to the back. In terms of when we look to the block plan, the rear element here at ground floor is the area that needs to be considered in terms of whether or not it results in a sense of enclosure to the neighbouring property. As mentioned, it's 2.5 metres to the top of the eaves before it then pitches away from that boundary. This is an idea of what the timber louvered screen would look like to restrict views out. I've somehow pressed the right mouse button. There we go. So in terms of the relationship with the neighbouring property to the south on Eastern Esplanade, because of the distance that you've got from the property, the neighbouring property to the boundary, the sort of incursion further back from the single-storey extension, combined with the 2.5 metre height, is considered to be acceptable on the rear-facing windows in that property. It's a bedroom window at ground floor as part of the conversion, but because it's set away and it's only a single-storey structure, it's considered to be acceptable. In terms of the development at the rear, so this Dickens Road's on the left, and this is now the ground floor plan where you've got you see the garage itself. You've got the door that opens into the garden, which then accesses the top, which is put forward to be a home office. So we've got the layout of that. So the red is actually showing where you can actually get 2 metres headroom. Actually, headroom's actually sort of 1.55 is the requirements. There is actually a bit more available. One of the issues that was raised as part of the consultation was these are the dormer windows in that outbuilding that face back towards the back elevation of the main property. These have been conditioned or would be conditioned to be fitted with obscure glass because you would get views back into the neighbouring property because of the relationship that you've got. So that's a requirement of any permission were it to be granted. This is the front elevation of the garage fronting Dickens Road. And then this is the west elevation facing the neighbour. And to show you the relationship with the neighbouring property, I'm just going to click through. You can see they've got rainwater storage as part of that outbuilding. This is the street scene. So this was something specifically that we felt we needed to get an idea of how it related to the bungalow that you've got next door. It is considered that there is a separation distance there. As I mentioned earlier, there isn't any impact on side windows of the property on Dickens Road, but the main consideration here is the visual impact. Because it's obviously set away from the neighbour, and it doesn't compete in terms of its ridge height, and it pitches away, it's considered that the design of it was is considered acceptable from our perspective. So overall, it is considered to be in accordance with the character and area character and appearance policies in both the Broadstairs Neighbourhood Plan and the Thanet Local Plan, as well as with the changes that have been made and the safeguarding conditions. It would safeguard the living conditions of neighbouring properties. So it is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone to speak? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. I just have a question about the outbuilding.
Sorry, I missed a bit. I've just realised. My apologies. Move that the officer recommendation is approved first, and seconded by Councillor Matterface. Sorry, and then people to speak. I got Councillor Garner.
Thank you. As I indicated, I just have a question about the outbuilding. I've looked at the report, and there's condition 6 states the use of the outbuilding hereby approved shall be limited to purposes ancillary to the needs and personal enjoyment of the occupants of the dwelling, and shall at no time be used for independent business or commercial purposes. So I'm just seeking confirmation that my assumption is correct here, that the residents are not allowed to use that as either a holiday let, Airbnb, or anything along those lines.
Yep, that is correct. Yeah, it's that would be a distinct use in the sense of not being ancillary or incidental is the requirement usually in the legal term. So yeah, that would preclude that.
Because I know there have been a number of other planning applications that have been granted like this, where the applicants have then come back and sought the removal of condition 6, in this case, 1, 2 or 3 in others, to allow for the use of that annex. So in this case, we're not allowing for that, and obviously we have to take every planning application as it comes, but we're quite clear in this case that it isn't used for an Airbnb or holiday let, like a number of the other properties up Dickens Road. Thank you.
Councillor Rattigan.
Yeah, I think the planning office has covered all the bases of sort of, with the sort of, what do you call it, obscured glazing, regards to not being able to use it for sort of Airbnb or holiday. So I think it's a nice design. Yeah, and I would support it.
Councillor Matterface.
I wanted to say that the garage, that door and that window is very traditional. A lot of the properties in that area have got garages, not necessarily with the Home Office, but I think the garage is very much in keeping with the rest of Dickens Road and with the Esplanade.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I feel this is a very prominent location and needed to be looked at very carefully. Thank you very much for the detailed report. I think that the overlooking and loss of privacy to neighbours has been addressed very carefully. I think materials are suitable with matching materials, and I think I'm quite happy for this to go ahead. Thank you.
And how do we ensure that the obscured glass is remains in place ad infinitum?
We enforce condition 5, which would require that they've got the obscure glass has got to be permanently retained thereafter. Is one of the requirements. So if it was to be removed, then they'd be in breach of that condition, and we would serve a breach condition notice on it.
Even in 20 years' time.
If we're all still here. Yeah.
Thank you. In which case, I put the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? And were there any abstentions or against? And that's carried. Right, in that case,
That's the end.
that's the end. So I've lost my bit on the sheet of paper that says good night. So, but thank you very much and good night. Thank you.